Hello, this is Signals from the Hill, a podcast about comics from Avery Hill Publishing. I am Ricky Miller, co-publisher at Avery Hill. So this is a special edition of the podcast where we're joined by comics superstar Tillie Walden to discuss On a Sunbeam, which came out 5 years ago this autumn. I had the huge honor of editing the webcomic of On a Sunbeam when Tillie was working on it back in 2016. And so was there right at the beginning and had the privilege of being in very close proximity as it was developing, which is still one of the best experiences I've ever had in comics. Avery Hill then published On a Sunbeam in the UK when she decided to release it as a book, and it's still our best-selling title most months. If you haven't read it, please do. It really is a masterpiece. In this conversation that you're about to listen to, we discuss the early origins of the comic. We go deep into some parts of the story and characters, and we even speculate about a potential sequel. Spoilers, probably not going to happen. One thing we don't mention is that she had just turned 19 when she was working on this book, which is still almost unbelievable considering the level of work involved, and I thought it was probably worth reiterating that here. So I hope you enjoy this as much as Tillie and I enjoyed the walk down memory lane and plump up a cushion as it's a long one. Hey Tillie, how are you?
I'm good, Ricky. How are you?
I have hay fever,
You
so
do?
yeah, you know me. I'm like everything to do with the sun possible is just like
Oh
my
yeah,
enemy.
not good.
Yeah, just pale Englishman. Um,
You're
so
a door kid.
so we're here to talk about your masterpiece. There might be more than one on masterpiece. That's not for me to say, but this particular masterpiece on the Sunbeam, because we are coming up to the 5-year print anniversary.
I can't believe that. So that
Yeah, I
must
know.
mean then it's even more than 5 years since the webcomic, right?
Yes, so when I was doing the research, we first started talking about this in July 2016. And you already had the idea by that point. You were kind of like it was fermenting in your brain. So and I think you'd mentioned stuff about it before, as in like
Yeah.
space book and something to do with architecture in space and kind of things like that. So it was kind of already percolating. I think pretty much. So the timeline is A City Inside had just come out.
Mm-hmm.
Spinning you'd have wrapped, but wasn't going to come out for another year, I think. So you
Mm-hmm.
were kind of in between that phase where you were waiting for a book to come out. One had just come out, so you were kind of like, yeah. I think that's basically when you started thinking about it, and then, yeah, I think it was actually published on the internet in August that year, so it happened very quickly.
August of
I
2016.
think so. Yeah,
I
yeah.
I believe you. If anyone's gonna get that date right, it's gonna be you.
Yeah, I think when I was kind of looking through that, that looked like when it was. It might even have been July. I can't remember now. But yeah, it was fairly quickly, because you're super fast, as we know, especially during that period. That was like your
Oh yeah,
peak.
it's peak fast. I'm slow now. I'm old and slow.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, you were drawing with two hands back then. That was like that was different times, and you were still getting up early.
I was still getting up early, although I do think that it's weird to say, but I do think I care more now about how my pages look than I did back then. Whereas I feel like back then I just kind of like threw myself through it. Whereas now I can't abide by like a page where I'm like, nah, I could do a little bit better. I'm just gonna wait. I'm gonna do it a little bit better.
So do you mean like the finish a physical page or
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't it's always funny for me seeing the final art from Sunbeam. I think there are some very beautiful pages and I think I learned a lot, but I think there's also a lot that I rushed, but I don't think necessarily to the story's detriment. I think it was just kind of a phase in my artistic career. Weird
But
word to say, but
I mean like we're kind of glossing over the main one of the main characteristics of this book is the pace and yeah,
yeah.
the fact that you you didn't rush. Well, yeah, you could say rush, but the fact is, it was being released episodically. It was like
That's
one
true.
chapter a week. So you had
Yeah,
deadlines which you haven't had before or since in the same kind of way for episodes. So, and
that's
whatever
so
was going
true.
on in your life, you hit that. And yeah, I mean that's and some of those chapters, like I remember 40 or 50-page chapters coming out for which you had
I
done
remember they got
in
longer.
yeah. I mean, like, yeah, there was genuinely a time where I was like, I don't have time to edit this week. And you were like, I'm just putting it out there, and I was like, okay, fine.
Oh my God. Yeah, you're right. I guess it is a project that's really defined by serialization.
Yeah, which I do find really interesting because it's the first time you did it. I mean, you're
Mhm.
arguably
And the
doing it
last time.
now. Well, I mean, the Walking Dead books are, but they're just a year apart. But
Mhm.
so it's kind of a bit of a longer deadline.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how did you feel about that kind of? Can you remember how you felt about the serialization? 'Cause
I remember it feeling exciting because I think, like you were saying, I was waiting on Spinning coming out, and I had spent all this time making this 400-page graphic novel memoir, which was a really draining experience, a good experience, but a draining experience. And so I think that I remember working on Sunbeam is for like the first half of the book feeling really like jazz compared to classical music. I felt like I was getting to be creative each week, constantly just sort of starting and finishing is a really satisfying feeling as a cartoonist. And like you would edit things and I would just like do the edits super fast. Um, it was really invigorating, but I remember in doing the second half of the book, once we had to sort of like really get the plot making sense, because I remember you and I had a very big meeting around chapter 10 to figure out what the fuck was going on in the story. But I remember the second half being harder to get through and the serialization feeling more burdensome, because at that point I think I cared enough about the story that I was ready to take my time a little more.
mm.
Um,
Plus,
but I think
you were traveling as well at that point,
I
weren't you?
was,
I
I
think
was, I was in
you're in Berlin.
Japan.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Japan and then
Japan and
Berlin.
Berlin. Or Tokyo and Berlin, Japan and Germany. And yeah, I remember working on like chapter 15 in Tokyo or something. And I think I was drawing the staircase for the first time when I was in Tokyo. And then I was finishing it in Berlin. I brought a scanner with me. I put it in my suitcase. That was the only way that was possible. And then the reason there's no original art except for the first page really from Sunbeam is because I couldn't afford to bring it from Tokyo to Berlin. It was too heavy and I would have had to pay like an extra fee. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So I just recycled it all.
It still kills me to this day. I
Yeah.
remember you telling me doing that, and I was like, Tilly, I would have flown out there
I wasn't
and
about to go to a
taken those.
Japanese post office. I
I
was
would genuinely have got on a plane and picked it up off of you.
customs form. No, I wasn't gonna do it. But yeah, the process for the book was like really, really wild and fast, which I think reflects some of the energy in the narrative, because I feel like I haven't read the comic in a long time and I don't plan on it, but what I remember is that each chapter there's like a sense of propulsion. Like the story really does move.
Yeah, and it was interesting when I kind of went back through all of our emails from that time period, and
Yeah.
you did send me like a document with like this was just at the very beginning, which you'd already worked out, which was has all the characters. It has all the first 12 chapters, I think, which is probably where that was where you got to with the storyline, which is why we had to suddenly halfway through suddenly go, oh, okay, where is the rest of this going?
Mm.
And it is really interesting, that document, because it is just it's all there and it's actually nicely laid out as well. I was quite impressed.
That's crazy. I don't remember planning anything. I just remember feeling like I have no idea where Grace is. Like I know
Yeah.
that these two girls will go to school and fall in love. And I know that one of them is going to disappear, but I have no idea why she's going to disappear. Um, which was actually a really fun way to write, to be like, because just like the audience doesn't know what happened to Grace, I also did not know.
Yeah, it's a shame. I feel like I think we did all those sessions on Skype, and
Yes, we
we
did.
didn't document it, which is
Oh
such a
God.
shame.
If
Because
only. I would have been so
yeah,
curious to hear how we kind of worked through all of that. And then I remember working on like Elliot's backstory was also um totally added in afterwards. I
yeah,
mean, Elliot being selectively mute is something I get asked about a lot, actually. And it's because I knew someone who was selectively mute when I was a kid, and I always thought it was a really interesting way to decide to interact with the world. But like the staircase and Sid and ancient beings and all that sort of came later.
yeah. See, we've already diverged from what I had planned in this
Oh,
conversation,
bring us back,
which I
Ricky.
knew would
Reel
happen,
me
which I knew
in.
would happen. So uh, so oh, I just want to say my favorite line in that document, which I did make a note of, and it's about Mia, and you say she doesn't really realize how gay she is yet, but she is very gay.
That sounds like
It made
something
me
I would write when I was young.
it
Oh
made me
my
laugh at the
God.
time and made me laugh again when I just read it. I was like,
It's
yes.
so funny. I mean, I Sunbeam was such a milestone for me as like a gay creator, because it was like the most queer book I had ever done. But now that I'm older, I it's almost hard to remember how significant that was or what that really felt like, because at this point, like my gayness is it's so different. I don't know. I think about romance so differently than I did when I was working on Sunbeam. And for like years after the book came out, I remember feeling kind of frustrated with it because I was like, it's too sweet. It's too sweet. It drives me crazy. But now, I mean, I've like come around in the cycle where I'm like, yeah, it's fine that it's sweet. Like clearly I needed to make something sweet at the time.
There's definitely a room for that. Everyone likes something a bit sweet. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, I'm going to jump around in my list then because
Yeah.
while we're on that kind of topic, there's kind of two questions I did want to ask you about that. The first of those is about Elle being non-binary, which is stated very early in the book.
Mhm.
And it's something I've like the scene where Jules um, defends Elle's pronouns. Um, it's
Yeah.
something I've heard repeated back by people on Twitter and stuff, and I I was wondering, was that like a conscious thing that you wanting to bring in a non-binary character because you felt that there was a political reason for it, or was it just story based, or
I think there was really a political reason. I think that it becomes a political reason because I think queer communities are political by existing, even when we don't really want to be. And making Elliot non binary was entirely because I wanted the Sunbeam crew to reflect the kinds of people that I knew. And I was in my own real life coming to know a lot more queer people, um, and non binary people and trans people. And so it just sort of felt like, I don't know, natural. I just sort of saw Elliot that way. Um, their character made sense to me. And when that scene where Jules is defending Elliot's pronouns, I I'm conflicted about it because I remember one of my intentions going into the book was that I didn't want anyone to experience homophobia, transphobia, any of that. I didn't want anyone to be given a hard time, but that I was working on that chapter when Trump was elected, and I remember feeling like, oh God, I don't know, like I really needed to defend queer people in this community. Um, And so I guess I'm glad it's in the book because I think it's important, but it was my initial intention to make the universe to have the problems these people face never have to do with their identity. And I still think overall that that's the case for the universe. No one is really, for the most part, ever given a hard time. But yeah, that was politically motivated, was having that scene where Jules defends their pronouns, because I was just I was just kind of sick to my stomach about the real world. Ugh, not space. Space was fine. Everyone in space and Sunbeam was fine, but
Yeah, it's a utopian vision of everyone working together, but the only way that happens is the fact that we've removed men from the universe, essentially. So
no.
that's kind of what I find interesting about the non-binary side of it, because it's a reaction against womanhood, I guess. Well, not a reaction against womanhood, but it's a character who defines himself as non-woman in a world when that's the only option. And
Yeah. I think that what I like about the utopia of Sunbeam is that it doesn't really define what isn't there. It only defines what is there. And so, like, some people are like, there's only women in the book. And it's like, that's not really true, unless, what's your definition of a woman? And it can get really thorny, I think, when you decide exactly what kinds of people are existing in this universe. But I think that the idea that it is just a queer universe is very interesting. And now, I mean, the decision to not have cisgender men in the story was, you remember, it was an accident. It totally it's become a very defining feature of the book itself, but it really wasn't intentional. I think I was like on chapter 7 or 8, there was some point where you said to me like, "Are there men?" And I was just like, "No, I guess not." At this
I'm
point, if there isn't anyone except for the cat is male.
Yeah. In your document, actually, there is a mention of a man in one of the later chapters, which I found quite interesting when I reread it, and yeah, I mean, which supports the fact that it wasn't conscious until you kind of got through part of the story, and then I remember we discussed it, and we were like, oh, should we explain it? Like why there are no men, and we
Yes,
bounced a
yeah.
couple of ideas around, then we're like, no, that's anything is we come up with is going to be terrible, so let's just not talk about it.
I know. And I think that what's so funny about, like, the patriarchy and sexism and all this stuff is that often media that is, like, very much not about men still ends up being about men. I think about something like Why the Last Man, where it's like, really, there's one man in this universe and the story is about you. And so I
Hmm.
think that the only reason Sunbeam's universe works is because it's never acknowledged. And I don't acknowledge how biology works or how, like, anyone is born. I remember getting emails from people that were like, back when I had a public email address, um, that was like, I this isn't possible. This isn't science fiction anymore because the science doesn't work. And I was like, well, yeah, none of it's possible to begin with because it's drawings. So your argument is already out the window because none of this is this obviously this whole thing is made up. But
I mean, there are flying cats in space that
yeah,
attack the fish
there's
ships.
flying cats, flying fish, and
People
I
were
think that
okay with that, though. It's just the lack of men that they found disturbing.
yeah, it's really funny. Although now I'm I don't know, I think I have a really different take, and maybe this is like going, or not a different take, but it, like, in my current state, and this is entirely because I'm pregnant with a boy. I'm just like, I almost miss men in the story because I almost feel like I want to look at my son, assuming that's, if a boy is who he is, I want to be like, you belong here too. Now I'm like, oh my God, I have to tell him he's not in this book. Not that he's gonna care about my comics at all, because he's gonna have other stuff to do. And who wants to read their mom's comics? But I am now very interested in exploring the nuances of like of men and of queerness with men and all of that. I don't know. It's very interesting how your worldview just changes and grows. But I don't think I'd ever make a story like Sunbeam again. But I think that I made it at the right moment for myself.
I'm excited about the idea of having a Tillie Walden male role model. I've got
Right?
Lars, who is
I
awesome from
know.
the end
One
of
of the
summer.
only times I've written a male character was in my
Yeah,
first book. And I think that I needed to focus, hyper fixate on women and queer people for, I mean, I don't know, 8 graphic novels. Who's counting? I don't know. A lot of books. But now I don't know, I'm excited to expand that because I've also realized like, I don't know, otherness and heroism and bravery and all the qualities about a queer life that are interesting to me really do apply to almost everyone in a lot of different ways. So I don't know if it'll be a disappointment to to fans for them to hear that I'm interested in men in writing male characters, but um or yeah, I don't know. I always want to feel like my comics are like expanding. And I think that Sunbeam was so huge for me, huge for us, because it was this like huge expansion of what was possible in a story, visually and narratively. It's such a complex story. It's so huge.
it's a lot. There is a lot.
It's a lot. It's a whole world. And since Sunbeam, I've never done world building like that since. And I do miss it. I miss being in a universe entirely of my own creation. And it's because, I mean, right now I'm working on The Walking Dead. I'm working on these books with Tegan and Sarah. It is truly not my creation. Um, but I don't know if we got the band back together and decided to do like another sci-fi book, like what I don't know what that would look like. It'd be
Okay,
fascinating.
I'm going to get to that at the end. We're going to discuss what a
I'm
potential
sorry,
sequel
I'm all
to
over the
Sunbeam would
place.
be. Oh. So what I
Let's focus,
wanted
Ricky.
to talk about next is the title, actually.
Oh yeah.
So that's how far I've got away from the order of things. So I thought I'd read out a few of the early titles we
Oh my God,
discussed,
do it.
and see if you like any of them. And yeah, and I'm going to see if the one that was your favorite is still going to be your favorite. So we had Only Light Years Away.
Disgusting. I don't like it.
Yeah. Some Other Space.
I guess I could cope with that.
Our Dream Celestial.
Ugh, ugh, so cheesy. Ugh,
A,
dreams,
n-
no.
a New Orbit.
A new orbit. I like that. That sounds almost like something not at all related to this book. Orbit.
Well,
That's so
I
science
I
fiction.
think we were actually discussing this before we had very much of the book at all. So,
Oh, so
so
funny. So
yeah.
funny.
Because you had to, well, the reason was because you had to get a web domain for it. So yeah,
That's
that was kind of why we
right.
needed a
That's
title.
right.
Um, and normally the titles come pretty late for you, but and the final one was A Light Dream Away.
Mm. Ugh.
No, they're all pretty sickly. Your favorite was Some Other Space. We did think about that for a while.
I liked the most neutral one. Not
Yeah, yeah,
surprising.
yeah. And then basically the way we came up with the title in the end was we started thinking about what the name of the spaceship would be and trying to base it on that. And then we kind of went through a list of ancient Greek sailing ships. And
That's
there was,
all you. For those who aren't
yeah,
who
I'm a
don't know,
nerd.
Ricky, tell them your background.
I'd studied classics, so there's a very pretentious email where I'm like, I decided the answer is in ancient Greece because
But this was
I
amazing for
love
me
ancient
because I
Greece.
never went to college, so I got to experience some of Ricky's classic studies through his emails.
School of Hard Knocks, wasn't it, Tilly? It
Well,
was
hard knocks. Oh yeah.
everything you know from the streets. Um, and we decided we liked Actis, which is Greek for sunbeam, and then that made me think of the Belle and Sebastian song "Asleep on the Sunbeam," and we kind of went from there, and we had a theme song as well
It was
because
all you. It was so I mean, what was so perfect about the way the ship and the book was named is it was completely defined by your background in classics and your love of Belle and Sebastian. And I love Belle and Sebastian, but I don't love Belle and Sebastian enough to like call to myself song titles. So I don't know. It was just like I've had, I think almost all of my books have been named by someone else, maybe every single book. But most of the time it's not so defined by who your editor is. It's just kind of random. It's just
Mm,
like, here's a list of names, these are fine. But I think it speaks to how sort of personal and how involved you were on this project. You know, it was
yeah.
more than just really you like reading it and being like, you spelled it's wrong again. Put an apostrophe there.
Yeah, I think it was nostrils and pupils were
I remember that.
the recurring thing I was picking up because I didn't know about manga. I didn't know about manga at the time, so and that was what you were doing. It was manga. Um,
Yeah, I was trying to simplify. I don't think I was doing the best job of it though, which is why it was good that you were looking at it.
cool. So next, I wanted to go through. Basically, I reread the first. Again, I haven't read it since the webcomic. I've never. Yeah, like again,
Why
it.
would you? You got other stuff to read.
No, well, it to be honest, it was just because I loved working on it so much, and I
Uh,
was so deep into it at the time that I genuinely couldn't read it. Like
mhm.
I didn't want to read it. I felt
Yeah.
like it would change it in my head. So
Mm,
yes, I haven't read it
true.
since until today, where but I only got through 150 pages because I ran out of time.
Lame. Wow.
Um, and so I wanted to go through a few of the pages and talk about how I felt about them. And what we'll
Yeah.
do is we'll put those pages on here as well as little clips and uh, yeah, in the show notes. So the first one is the first page, which if everyone wants to reach for their copy of On the Sunbeam, is a starscape, and then Mia looking out of the spaceship window, and then the fish ship approaching a building. And it's like the most perfect first page ever. Like how, and probably the most finished first page of all the ones I've seen
I know, right?
of yours of On
I
the
remember
Sunbeam.
it
It's
I
like,
remember it taking forever. It was the part that took forever was the second panel, the
yeah, there's a lot of
detail
detail on that ship.
on the ship. But I remember the first panel took no time at all because there's nothing in it. And I
No.
still, when I look at this page, I think it's right that that is the first panel, but my initial reaction to looking at the first page is like, I did not try in that first panel. I could have tried. Like, why is there just like a little planet in the lower right hand corner? Like, why did I not draw that planet center? I don't know. I don't love that composition, but as a page, I remember it taking multiple days to do one page, which for the pace for On a Sunbeam is like unbelievable. There was no time to be spending a few days on one page.
What was it? The first page you drew
Yeah,
for it? It was,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. I worked totally in order. Um, and I still remember the paper. It was 9 by 12 Bristol board. And I remember when I was drawing Mia in the second panel, I remember feeling really scared because I felt like I was going to mess her up. And the fact that like you don't see her shoulder, I was like, it's not going to make sense. I didn't know how to really do a reflection.
It
I
looks
was
so
like,
good though.
I'm
It
not
looks
sure. It
so
worked
good.
out. It worked out. And I actually think that my nerves are what made it good because I had to slow down and I really had to like consider. And then when I was toning it, when I was doing the shadows, I also remember having a crisis where I was like, how do I make this look like a reflection? Um, but it it totally worked out. And this page is what defines stylistically the entire book.
I mean, it's an epic page, and yeah. It's such a good page, such a good page. The next
And I
one,
have the original for this one. I do
yeah,
have it.
are you keeping
It's
that?
gorgeous.
Are you keeping that? Do you frame it?
Yeah, I'll keep it.
Okay,
I won't. I'm not precious about my work, but I am precious about this one page. I
yeah,
do love
it's key. Yeah, never get rid of that.
it.
Um, and then the next page
Mhm,
is the splash where the crew are just about to deal with their first building,
mhm,
and the text on it is this will be a fun one. And I've always remembered this page, and if like it feels like a mission statement from you for the comic as a whole to me, that line, because
a great
it
point.
is what it was, especially like those early chapters.
It was
It
just fun.
was, yeah, like the whole like the enthusiasm, the energy. It's a fun book at that point.
You're so right. Yeah, I remember the most riveting thing on this page for me was not drawing it, but coloring it. And when I realized I should put orange on the trees, and it just, at this point, I mean, if we think of the color work I've done to this date, I've only ever done one, maybe two colors at most. Sunbeam is the book where I learned to color. Um, and it was the one of the few times I remember working on a page and feeling like it came alive in the colors, not in the inks, because usually I feel like my pages come alive in the inking stage. Um,
But that was kind of the intention, wasn't it,
yeah,
with this book, which is why those pages, another reason why those pages are so sparse is because you were composing with color by
I
at that point,
know.
and there was a deliberate, you wanted to learn that skill, didn't you? I think.
I did, and what's so funny looking back now is I was doing the coloring in such a I don't know what's a nice word to say, childish way, because I still I'm mildly proficient with Photoshop, but I didn't really know about this whole multiple layers thing in Photoshop. And so I was paint bucket filling in to color a graphic novel. I didn't know about how to shade. I mean, and when I figured out how to do a multiply layer, this is getting very technical, but it is so hysterically slapdash, the method of the colors, and I was using a bamboo tablet that was the size of my hand to color it, and I had not installed the driver software because I didn't know I had to do that, so I was basically coloring this book with a mouse, and I I love it because I love that in comics, you really can just try things out, and it's okay if you do it the wrong way. I technically colored a 500-page book incorrectly, where it's like the files would are terrifying to look at, but it's okay. It looks fine. The black's printed black, the color's printed color. Um, and now I know a little bit more about layers.
Well, I mean, after that, it's probably your peak color book, which was Are You Listening? Which is
That's right.
where you probably
That's the one where I learned what an overlay was. That was shocking.
So when I knew we were going to do this podcast, I
Yeah.
asked a few people on Twitter to come up with some questions, which I was going to do at the end, but there's one actually related to the color, which is
Mm.
from Miss Everdeen. And the question is, how do you decide what color and tones to use for each story? Do the colors just come to you, or do you have to think a lot about it?
I was really, really scared to do the colors for this book, because, like we've just been talking about, I felt really new at it. And I don't even know if you know this, but the way I colored the first chapter is I actually felt like I couldn't even pick a color. So I used the paint bucket tool to fill it all in gray. And so the whole first chapter was toned with gray. And then I used the hue and saturation tool and just kept sliding back and forth, looking at all the different making the tones all different colors. And there was something about this muted magenta that really worked. And so I guess to this question, it's like in a way it is a choice because I saw that magenta and was like, that works. But there's something very subconscious about the way I picked that initial color for the present day. And then the color for the past being blue was entirely a reaction to the magenta, um, because they just look nice together. And it couldn't be green, it couldn't be yellow, couldn't be orange. Like it had to start to feel like something very very basic. But it wasn't until the second half of the book, when we get to the staircase, that I truly began to pick colors and think like, I'm going to put red here, I'm going to put orange here, I'm going to mix blue in, I'm going to mix yellow in. But at that point I was feeling comfortable, and at that point I had stopped doing gray tones and turning them colorful. I had started just putting the colors in directly because I felt confident enough. But I think almost every chapter I add in like one more color. And that is my best advice for anyone wanting to work with color, is to start with less colors, to start with one color, get comfortable, learn about light, learn about dark, and then slowly add in one more color, add in one more color. It's the best way to learn. There's so much to do with just, I mean, like the book Ricky and I did. I love this part, which was done traditionally. It was watercolor, but it's just purple. You can be so colorful with just one color. And I think that I'm really glad I worked my way up to learning to color.
Cool. And so the next page I wanted to go on to is actually the first of the blue ones,
Mhm.
which is the first flashback scene. And it's got the text 5 years earlier on it, which I just think it's so cool, because at that point you kind of realize there were two timelines that were going to happen and they're running simultaneously. And
Love this
I,
page.
yeah, it's so good. But also what's great about it is how it reflects the very first page of the book, in that it's got the same layout. It's Mia again. It starts with a starscape and a building. It's yeah, it's just perfect. I love that page, and the colors. Yeah, the color is beautiful.
I was getting the hang of the colors. That second panel where Mia's lying on the bed is maybe my favorite. I think it is my favorite drawing of Mia I've done in the whole book.
It's brilliant.
Because there's something about, I mean, drawing people's really hard, and drawing people in a graphic novel, you're constantly having to mess around with all these different angles, and you're constantly pushing up against the barrier of your own ability, where it's like, I'm trying to draw a person from this angle, why doesn't it look right? And this was just one of those moments. I remember drawing this page and drawing Mia on the bed and being like, it looks right. I drew it and it looks right, and it was just totally stunning to me. And I think that like the way I drew Mia in that panel is still a way I draw now. Like there's like a through line through the continuum of time from like that drawing to now, where I had really mastered something. But then if I look at the rest of the panel, like the table next to Mia is like totally not drawn at all. It's like, I did not know tables at this point. I can do tables now. Um, but those moments where you feel like you really capture something in a drawing, it's just the best feeling
Yeah,
ever.
I
It's
mean
so
it.
riveting.
It's great that the table is barely there, because you don't
Doesn't
want it
matter.
distracting attention. And I
I
mean,
know. I know. It's good. It's so good. And I also think that like you should never stop yourself from drawing a table, even if you can't draw a table. Like just draw it. Who cares? It can look wrong, it can look incomplete. Um,
as long as
that's
people know it's a table, it's a table.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And nobody draws children on beds better than you
Floppy,
do. Like
floppy
literally,
children.
that is your,
It's my
if
bread and
I
butter. It's
I
my
mean,
goddamn bread and butter. I
like
love
you are
drawing.
the best ever at doing that. Like genuinely the best ever. There are
I
so
still
many
love doing it. I mean,
there.
look, the end of summer, my first book that we did together, it's like entirely a book about like a boy on pillows and cloth. It's so fun. It's absolutely so fun.
Actually, when I was going through these the emails from when we were planning this in July 2016, it was at the same time you were drawing the prequel to The End of Summer.
Oh, that's
So which has similar colors to this,
right.
and in terms of the cover, and also you can really see is the style of Sunbeam coming through, which
Yeah.
is and especially the upholstery. Because
Mhm.
I remember you kept going on about the upholstery and the blanket. Was it Mia's blanket or Grace's blanket? I can't remember which one.
I
That
think it's crazy.
was apparently important, and I can never quite figure out
There's
why.
stars on it because they're in space.
Yep.
Huge.
Oh, was it just that? Okay. And then yeah, the Lars is lying on, I think, Maya's bed. And there's a very similar blanket in it. And I was like, oh, it's a Tillie Walden motif.
It is.
Yeah.
It's totally a motif. It's totally a motif. Even even in my Walking Dead books, like there's still some pretty fluffy looking blankets, even though it's the apocalypse. I can't help myself.
Do you like a blanket?
I do. I love a comfortable bed.
So the next one is probably what I love the most about this book, which is just hanging out with the characters. And it's one of the many scenes where it's the first one, basically, where the space crew sit around playing some kind of hovering board game, which is just incredibly fun. And just the way they all interact, and there's quite a few scenes in these early chapters where they do stuff like that, where they're either watching TV or they're playing some kind of game late at night, and it is my favorite thing about the book because it's just experiencing the characters, hanging out with them, the banter. Jules is always hilarious,
Mhm.
and just I'd forgotten how funny the book was. It's definitely your funniest book.
I've forgotten. I don't know. I writing the characters at the time felt so natural, but I think that all I really fixated on after Sunbeam was then trying to write new kinds of characters because I remember feeling like so much of my dialogue abilities were like I was repeating myself or I was like writing the same kind of character over and over again. So I think that I very quickly kind of moved on or pushed away what we did with the characters in this book because I was so fixated on trying to do the next thing. But Sunbeam was also a fixation on trying to do the next thing because I was trying to get away from having just made a memoir, which is why it was so lighthearted. Only I'm sure other people have figured it out, but I've only ever been told by one person that they figured out what show they were watching in the book.
Oh,
Which is
really? Yeah, no,
yeah,
I
my
don't know. I did read that chapter today, actually. And no, I don't know. What was it?
so it's entirely because my mom worked in television for 30 years. She worked for HBO. Um, and we grew up, I watched a lot of HBO shows as a very small child. And when I was in middle school, I got really obsessed with the show 6 Feet Under, which is a show
Ah,
about death. And they're watching 6 Feet Under in
do
on a
you know which
Sunday, which
episode it
is
was?
so incongruous. It doesn't match at all tonally. But for me, it's like it's a show that's special to me and it's a show that's special to my mom. Um, and so I just worked that one right in there.
It's a great show. Great show.
It's a great show. But you're right. I the camaraderie of these characters is very it's very special. And I really there's so much there is it's like there's a lot of plot, but you're right that there is downtime in this story where they're just or I
The
mean
early
you could call
chapters,
it
there's a lot of downtime. Like, there's not much
yeah,
happens for
yeah.
quite a long time. Like I was on page 150, and yeah,
They're just
like they
chilling.
were just, yeah, they are just chilling. There's a few like little mini dramas, but yeah,
I bet I'm not gonna read it, but if I did read it, I bet I would
you
be
should read
shocked at how much is in there. No way, because if I read Sunbeam, then I have to read my other books, and I don't want to read any of them.
it.
Maybe someday, like 10
Actually,
years.
I have a test for you then. One of the characters they make have well, sorry, you made have a pass of as a figure skater. Which character was
Oh,
it?
I remember that. That's easy. It was Jules.
Yeah.
I only remember that because I remember drawing a sweater on her with an ice skate. I
Ah.
look, another thing that this is what happens when you look back at your old work, and this is why I'm not going to read it. But I could have, I could not have tried less on the outfits in this story. Everyone is wearing the most generic goddamn clothing.
There's a
And
lot of white t-shirts going
there's a lot of white
on.
t-shirts, which to be fair, very queer to wear like just a basic tee and call that fashion and look really cute doing it. But if I were to ever make like do like a lot of world building again, or I don't know, I would love to see myself try on outfits again, because I remember in the end of summer I really tried on the outfits. Like there were some robes and there were like ornamentation on the pants, and
Yeah.
there was, I mean, that's the defining feature of my first book, because I was trying. Um,
Um,
little
the
Sunbeam.
the next page, well, it's actually a chapter, which is chapter 6, which
Mhm.
is the silent chapter where they go on a school trip.
Oh,
Um,
what a nice book.
which yeah, it's just the loveliest chapter. It's just so sweet. It's like you were saying, it's sweet.
Yeah, it's sweet. And it's I can now say that I am happy that it's sweet, but if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have been so bitter about it. I would have been like, no, there's no conflict. There's no, why don't they struggle? Where's the darkness? But um I think the fact that this chapter is totally silent is like a feeling that I've been chasing in all my other work, because I keep trying to do it again. I keep trying to like make a silent chapter in my books, and it doesn't work. There isn't enough time, at least on the books I'm currently working on. But Sunbeam was such a creative project that it was like I could just make a whole chapter devoted to a silent school trip, and they like their love is sealed. But now thinking about my current graphic novel projects, the idea that I could take the time and space to do that is mind-blowing.
There's quite a lot of silent pages at the beginning of Clementine, isn't there?
There are, but you know what? They don't feel silent to me
No, no, you're right.
because
Because
they're zombies. There's
sound
because
effects
Sunbeam
is
was
yeah.
my invention. I was able to create like a huge sense of silence in the backgrounds. And I think it's because it's not grounded in reality. I mean, chapter 6 is also very defined by it being, I don't even know what it was. Was it a floating, was it an island? Was it a forest? Was it a,
I can't
where
remember.
did
They go
they
they go
go?
they go there by train, and then
That's
there's like caves, and
about that train.
they're on a
Very,
boat.
oh my God, very
Um,
boarding school. This, I wouldn't have known about trains unless I had gone, because I went to England to visit you a few times.
that's true. It was your first train or something, wasn't it? When you got from the airport to
Oh yeah,
uh
there are no trains
yeah,
in Texas.
no.
I mean, kind of. I'm sure someone's going to be like, "There's an Amtrak in Texas," but yeah, not like those British trains.
We're always on trains, us Brits. You know that.
It's, oh God, but they're so beautiful. That train was fun to draw. I remember drawing that train now. But this is all to say, I have no idea where they go in chapter 6, but I agree that the pacing of these three-tiered pages is really lovely, and it's why the book is so long, because everything is so drawn out, or it feels drawn out to me, but I know that to readers they probably read it super fast because there's no words. They're just like
And then the final page that I wanted to talk about
Mhm.
is when they're going to the dance on the hoverboard, which is iconic, absolutely iconic. It was, I kind of remembered it, but I feel like it hit me more when I reread it than it did when I remembered that, like I didn't cry, but I just mean like how much I like it. I feel like I like it
Yeah.
more now even than I did back then. It's just really nice.
I think it's because at this point in the story, I don't remember what chapter it is that they go to their prom, but maybe it's chapter 9, chapter 10.
Yeah.
Is it even earlier?
It might be earlier. I think it's 7 or 8 actually.
Oh my god,
It
wow.
might be 8. I think it's
Shows what
8.
I know
Yeah.
about this book. But I think at that point I had been leaning so much into the darkness of space. Not the actual darkness, but the like spot black in contrast with a lot of color as sort of my power tool to make a page beautiful. And what I did here was something that was still hard for me at the time, and that I think I do a lot more now, which is using white space, using the space on the page, and using emptiness to make a page beautiful. But that the hoverboard page totally works because there's no background. Um, and also, I nailed those figures, which is lovely to see. I
Yeah.
can't believe I drew that dress like that. I don't remember being able to draw a dress, just end of sentence. I do love that these hoverboards are like, what is that? There's no gear on it at all. There's no on off switch. It's just literally like a plank.
Probably made by Apple. They're very
Yeah,
minimalist.
you're right. I mean, but that is like the defining feature of my sci-fi world, which is just that like it works, it floats. No one's gonna ask me about it.
Does what it needs to.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's probably like like what you were talking about, and the fact that there is no darkness,
yeah,
especially in the early parts of this book, is that they do go to a dance, and having seen a lot of episodes of TV shows in America where there's a school dance, this is the antithesis of those because no one dies, no one gets
yeah.
bullied, no one gets pig blood poured all over them.
It's
It's
just very
just they just have a
nice.
nice time.
Which is so weird because I have never been to a dance ever. I didn't go to prom,
I'm going
and
to
I
take you to a
never
dance, Silly. I'm going
I
to
don't
take
want
you
to go
to
to
a
a
dance.
dance. But that's the thing. It's like the idea of going to a dance is like my idea of a bad time because I don't want to be in a crowd. I don't want people to watch me move. I don't want to have to wear an outfit. But
I
yeah,
mean,
that's so
those are
aside.
all things that figure skating probably. That is that coming back to you? Is that a repercussion from that?
I'm sure. I mean, I've always to this day hated dressing up. I've never liked Halloween because of figure skating, because I don't like I can't stand the idea of wearing like a costume. It like still bothers me. Um, which stinks because I live in this little Vermont town and they have this like wonderful Halloween parade, and every year my wife is like, let's dress up, and I'm like, I don't want to, because I'm a Grinch. But yeah, it's I forgot that there was a dance in Sunbeam. That's funny. That's one of those things where it's like I wonder how I would write that now if I was going to write a dance. Or I wonder what I would know about dances if I had actually been to one.
You
Maybe I'd
just
know. Maybe
you have
that's
to
why
have one.
it's so sweet and nice because I haven't been to a dance.
It's set in the school. You have to have a dance. It's the law.
I did always want to go to a giant school like that, but oh well. Wasn't in the cards for me. Now school's over. I'm not going back.
So that was all the pages I wanted to go through. So I'm gonna now dart to the rest of the questions I got from people from Twitter.
Oh yeah.
So the first one's from Chloe Green, who we know very well, who's worked for Avery Hill and runs part of the team that runs Full Bubble. So Chloe says, I'd love to know how much Tillie's art informs the narrative. Does the script come first? And does that alter as the drawing starts?
Mm, great question. I don't script, and I still don't script. I don't like it. I think it's boring. Sometimes I do outlines. But I think that my art, or rather the act of drawing, completely defines the narrative, because I think that the way I drew the school and the way I drew the ship in Sunbeam, in like the early chapters of Sunbeam, created like a character and a tone and an atmosphere that then informed the kind of story I wanted to tell, one of kind of like cavernous gay ennui and also some sweetness, as we've established. Um, so yeah, I think that it's like 100% like one to one. Is that the drawing informs the narrative. Sometimes I think in Sunbeam, think of like a plot point or a concept before the art existed, but I think that like plot points don't actually feel like plot to me until I see them drawn. And then once the pages are drawn, I can like, I don't know, the story can happen. Like I write the dialogue while I'm doing the final art, and like I'm constantly sort of adjusting things based on how the art turns out. Um, and like the character that is the location of the staircase was totally, I mean, like we had talked a lot about what the staircase was, but I don't feel like I really fully invested myself in it until I was drawing it. And I was like, it's like the Grand Canyon in space or something. I don't know, Arizona. Um, yeah, I for me drawing and story are forever linked, which is why I really don't consider myself a writer or an artist. I feel like cartoonist really is the perfect label for so many of us, because writing and drawing is like one big sort of blended experience.
So even the Walking Dead books, you don't have to do a script first. Ah,
Nope. Nope.
interesting.
I do have to do an
Did you
outline,
did you
but
fight for that, or did they want
I
one?
did, I did, and it
Yeah.
wasn't that hard because I think they thought it would go faster, but you know it doesn't go faster because you just have to edit the books more when you don't do a script. And I do make outlines, but then I kind of stray when I draw the book from the outline. But oh well, that's fine.
Okay, next question is from Nancy Art Music. Um, I love reading out Twitter handles. They're just not meant to be read aloud, are they?
Sure it is. We should do it more often.
How long did it take? Good Lord, it's so cool in so many ways. I get overwhelmed and bored by my work when it's over 12 pages, but 500, how do you stay excited through that? Also, as you get better at drawing, did you have to stop yourself from redrawing everything?
Oh, no, I didn't have to stop myself from redrawing everything really, because like who, I don't know, like why would you want to do that?
Plus,
I do
plus it was kind of out there, wasn't it? Because the way you were doing it
exactly.
sequentially, it was,
I think
yeah.
I think what, you know, this question is about, serialization is kind of the antidote to a lot of it, which is that
Hmm.
like you publish things in these small chunks, and you never I've never made a book where my intention is to like, it's going to sound weird, is to make a book. It's not, because the idea of going over to my desk and drawing 300 pages sounds like a terrible way to spend my time. But every story I've made, my intention is always to draw a scene or it's to draw a chapter. It's like you have to keep your goals so hyper fixated and small, because then you feel a sense of accomplishment. And with Sunbeam, I was so fixated on starting and finishing each chapter that it, you know, working on 20 pages is still a lot, but it feels a lot more feasible. I also think that one of the reasons I've been able to make so many books is because I draw on a lot of days when I don't feel like drawing. Not to like the detriment of my health or anything. Like I'm not like torturing myself, but I do genuinely try to think of being a cartoonist as a job, and it is my job. And I think about all the people I know who have to go to their jobs when they don't want to go to their jobs. And I think that that's been like a real key for me. Has been just like, I know I don't want to draw today, and I probably won't get a lot of drawing done, but I'm going to do a little bit. Um, and for a while, I was getting up early to draw in the mornings, which was a really good feeling, but was very reminiscent of my past as an ice skater when I would get up really early to practice. And I don't really do that anymore. I tend to sleep till like 8:30, although having a baby is going to change that one. So we'll see if I
Yes, it
get back to
will. Yes, it
we'll see if I'll get
will.
back to early mornings because of this baby. Um, but yeah, it's you and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to also just get over the fact that your art is going to look different from page one to the last page, but it's not actually something that you have to correct. And it's not something you have to shy away from. It's like, it's the cornerstone of what we do, which is that every cartoonist gets better when they draw comics. And I think that difference we see in our early art and our later art is something to be celebrated. You don't actually have to like go back and kind of update the older art, because what's going to happen is what is your current art now is going to be dated in a few years. If you keep doing this, you'll keep getting better. Um, to me, the art in Sunbeam feels really far away from what I can do now. And I think it's one of the reasons I don't tend to look at it, because I constantly seeing things where it's like, I can do that now. I can draw that angle. I can draw people in the world with a lot more confidence. But it should never, like, you still have to just make the graphic novel when you want to make the graphic novel. You'll never be ready, really. Um, and so Sunbeam was such an empowering project, because it was just a feeling of like, let's go for it. I don't know how long it's going to be, but if I decide I'm going to make a story from start to finish, I'm going to finish it. Because finishing the comics that you start is the uniting factor of what makes you a cartoonist. It's not actually about making a good comic, it's about finishing your comics. And I tell this to my students all the time, because you'll only truly be changed by the comic you make when you've finished it. Um, and it's hard. And what's so funny is I've made huge graphic novels, and when I get hired to do like a 6-page freelance comic, I don't know why I can't do it. It's so much work. I'm like 2 pages in and I'm like, this is awful. How does anyone make comics ever? So it's like the scale makes no sense. There are some, in some way, sometimes making a 12-page comic is harder than making a 400-page comic. I don't know why. It's literally just some weird psychology to this whole thing that we do.
Um, so I wanted to ask you how you feel about Sunbeam now, and I'm kind of interested where it stands in your career.
Yeah.
And I mean that in lots of different ways. I mean, to because I know you too well, I know your work too well. It's kind of hard for me to think about it separate, any of your work separate from each other. But I wonder, is this like the landmark one that people talk to you most about, that gets raised most, or
Absolutely.
it's sales wise, is it like the biggest? Like, because I don't know those things in the US. I see the UK figures, but yeah.
It is. It's by far the book of mine that has sold the best. I think it might be overtaken eventually by some of by actually my I think my Tegan and Sarah book is doing well. But for my original graphic novels, Sunbeam has always stood out, which is so funny because it's so big and it's so expensive. Um, and it is the one that people talk to me about the most. And I think that because of that, I feel I always get really excited when someone tells me like their favorite book is The End of Summer that I've made, or like when someone talks to me about one of my books that is a little in the background. Like I think the book of mine that is most in the background is A City Inside, which is a love. I'm so proud of it. I love that book.
It's good.
And I don't think it gets, I mean, it's not on a Sunbeam. So I don't know. I think that it's always funny the relationship authors have with their book that is the most popular. But what's funny about Sunbeam being the most popular is it's still not, it's not like it was ever like a huge hit. And all of my books have sort of sold reasonably well. Sunbeam sold like a little better than the other ones and sold a little faster. Um, and it's funny when I get royalty statements because I'll get royalties from all of my books, but the numbers are different and there's always more money from Sunbeam. So there is, career wise, it it paid off. It paid off to put a 500-page graphic novel online for free. It really, really did, which is like a hard pill to swallow because, people need to be paid, of course, well for the work that they do. But with Sunbeam, I'm actually really glad about it because I think that not tying it to money initially was what gave me so much freedom. I didn't have to ask a publisher for permission to make a giant book. We just made a giant book. Um, so yeah, career wise, Sunbeam will always stand out for me, and I think it was a really big turning point, and I think it's what has really defined me as a queer author, which I have mixed feelings about. Just because it's always strange to be put in boxes, because sometimes it still feels like people aren't always saying it in the most positive light. Like why not just cartoonist or author? Like why queer cartoonist? Because people don't say you're a straight cartoonist. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. Oh,
I,
Sunbeam. I have mixed
I
feelings about it, about it all.
I find that really strange. I know my opinion on this is probably not that relevant, but to me, it's like your least queer book, just because like
Huh.
I don't think of it like that. Is there are only
That's a good
women in
take,
it? It's like
Ricky. I
what
like that.
there are only women in it. Like who else are they going to get together with? Is like
I
the other
know.
ones. Like I love this part. Obviously, is the one that's most narratively about
Yeah.
being queer. A City Inside is very queer, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, The End of Summer's kind of queer in just
Just a dash.
yeah, just in different ways. Maybe that's at least one, but
Yeah, it's
um,
funny. I think you're actually right. I think Sunbeam is like about a lot more than queerness, and maybe even, yeah, it's not my most queer book, but I feel like it gets talked about to me as sort of the most quintessentially queer thing I've done. Um but yeah, I think that after working on Sunbeam, I really wanted to take a break from writing romance, and I still sort of feel that. And have felt frustration over the fact that in my Clementine series, which is The Walking Dead, there is like kind of a romantic element, and I like it because I like the characters, but I still feel, I think that the current thing that like 2023 Tillie is wrestling with is like that. I think romance in a narrative now to me feels like a crutch because I want the characters to have different reasons to care about each other than just being in love. Um,
so I do find that really interesting actually. So when you think about Sunbeam, you think of it as a romance.
I do. And I think it's
Huh.
because that's the part I fixated on after I finished it. And that's the part years later that I felt like I wanted to like write it differently, or like I wanted their romance to be more complex, um, and more challenging. But that's not what this book really is. And I think what would be very interesting is if I actually read Sunbeam and if it felt like a romance to me. But in my memory,
Yeah,
it's a romance.
yeah,
And I think
that's
that
kind of.
bothers me.
I mean that that is really interesting because I mean obviously that is a big element, but it
Yeah.
just gets so there's so little of that in the actual book, I think.
Right.
Um,
I forget
I
about
mean,
all the other characters.
yeah, I mean there's a lot of time where there's characters not being romantic, and even the courtship between Mia and Grace, there's a long time where it seems purely like a friendship, and there's lots of other stuff going on that they get involved in, but they're helping each other and stuff. And then I I think what is interesting about the romance is that you don't take the easy way out at the end with them just
Yeah,
suddenly getting back together and saying they love each other and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of, it could go in that direction, but it might not. Like in fact, it's almost implied that it probably won't, because
that I'm proud of. I
yeah,
really think I love the idea that what was once love when you were young can never truly be rekindled, but that love can influence a deep connection that can continue. Um, that I think that I think is really cool. That I'm really happy it went that way.
so this is a final thing I wanted to talk about.
Mm,
Over the years, we've joked many times about a sequel for On the Sunbeam, and we've kind of discussed a few ideas, just kind of off the cuff things. But
mm.
if there was a sequel, what would happen?
Ugh, it's so difficult because right now I'm in a phase where I don't want to do a sequel. I go back and forth where like sometimes it really does sound like so much fun, but then other times I'm like, I want to do something totally new. What would happen if there was a sequel? I actually think that given where I'm at in life, I think what I would want to do, and I don't think this is what we discussed initially, but I think what I would want to do right now is have a much more dramatic time shift and go like deep into maybe even old age for the current cast and have around them a cast of like their kids and their like companions, like a very, very accelerated future. Because I think that I would need to find a way to connect my like current life to Sunbeam again. And
Hmm.
I think if On a Sunbeam as it stands is like deeply connected to who I was at age 20, I think the sequel would need to be like really deeply connected to like me becoming a mother, me being married, me like thinking about these like next stages of life. And I think that in a sequel, I would also want to find like a really new way for the characters to interact with the universe. I don't think I'd want them to work on buildings anymore. I would want to draw a lot of buildings, don't get me wrong. I'd still want to draw crazy buildings, but I'd want to rethink or think about like just how different we become when, 40 years passes and how we spend our time. And I think it would be actually a really fun thought experiment to think about how these characters would age and who truly would still know each other, because I think they would have really disintegrated as a group, but there would still be a few tethers um, between them. I don't know, I know it's
I don't
bleak,
want to
but
read that, Tilly. I don't
I
want to
know,
read
but
them
maybe
disintegrating.
that's the sequel I want to do. I want to write something bleak like they're at Alma and Char's funeral. I know that's really sad, but
Well, that is what I was thinking when you started saying that. I was thinking, well, Alma and Char,
yeah, I think
they're
they'd be
kind of
gone.
living a life very similar to what you are at the moment.
But this is something I think about constantly, how like when Alma and Shar in the first book are in the heyday of their lives. They're young, they're happy, they're committed, and then like there will come a day when it will like be totally overtaken by other people's stories. Um, but I think that there would be a way to write a sequel in this bleak sequel that I'm writing right now, um, where you can show the effect their life has had on other people. But I don't know. And I feel like I'd want like at least one character to just be like totally off the grid. Like we don't know what happened to them and they have no way to get in touch. The universe is too big. Hmm. This
It's The
is,
Empire Strikes Back. We did
yeah,
Star Wars. Now you're going for the bleak sequel.
The Bleak sequel.
It'd
But
have
see,
to
this
be a
is why
trilogy if you do that. It'd have to
I
be a trilogy.
know, I know. This is why I think, and you know what I would never do, and I think it bothers me to even think about it, is like start with new characters, but in the same universe. I would never want to do that. That would feel bad.
One of the things we discussed actually, and it was during the time when you wanted to do a book about tall ships,
What
was
ships?
tall ships, as in like sailing ships. Do you remember? Like
Oh, yes.
you
Yeah,
got
I
kind
remember
of
that.
into yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and we discussed the idea of like just having the crew, but in the past, like on like pirate ships and stuff. I
Oh,
feel like
that's
that would
cool.
be
I
fun.
do that too. I would also go far back into the past. Yeah, I could do that. Oh my God, so strange. Yeah, I mean, it's like we're recording this podcast because this is kind of an anniversary of this book, and it's very trippy to try to get back to the mindset that we were in when this was all happening.
We have very different lives. We have very different lives.
Yeah, you have a baby. You got a
I have a
little guy.
baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's different. No, you're right. Actually, I've come around to your way of thinking. Yeah, maybe it's best left where it was.
Oh my God. That who knew we would record the moment when we both realized that an On a Sunbeam sequel will never happen.
Oh my God. Well, it could do, just not by you.
Ew,
License
no,
it
I'm not
out.
letting anyone else touch this book. No, no. No, there's too many other exciting new stories to write. Like I mean, God, like talking about Sunbeam gets me excited about the potential for new stories and for new worlds. And there can always be features and concepts from Sunbeam that I carry with me through my work, which I think has already happened. Um, but yeah, it's just too exciting to think about new making new stories and making stories that really reflect where you're at right now.
Which sounds like a perfect last line, I think.
Wow, you nailed it.
You're a pro. You're a pro.
Wrap it in a bow.
Tillie Walden, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Ricky. This was great.